thick of it apparently, and came out of it. Yeah. And of course many of his followers by that time had followed suit, and they came out of the battle and said the same thing. But the ones who got killed, they trespassed some of the rules that he'd set up. That was the turning point in Ngāti Pro's acceptance of Christianity. That was huge. And they came back when they finished with, Te Kania Takirau said that's enough. They left over there and came back. But what happened was they stayed over here at Rangitukia and Whakawhitira for quite a long time afterwards. And what had happened there was that they became better at integrating themselves, hapu with hapu, and of course with the Christian ethic on top of that and its kinds of teachings, it supported that, eh? But the other thing that Piripi did, and there were about 6 or 8 of them altogether, they started to teach them how to read and write. Mind you, the only book they had, I think, was the Bible. And they shared it, and they learned how to write. But they didn't have pencils, pens or paper. They invented things like scratching into leaves, like rangiora leaves. They scribed into those on flax leaves. Cleared patches on the ground outside and wrote into that and kept teaching one another. And it took off with the very young as well as the very old. Everybody was into reading and writing. And that made a huge difference. And you'll see it on these panels, see? They don't look, they look sort of very ordinary to us, eh? But those names on there, at the time this house was built, really big stuff. And I'll come back to that. Anyhow, they learned how to read and write, and they maintained themselves for quite some time. And then gradually, the hapu went back to their own ancestral lands and started to work their lands. However, huge changes had taken place in terms of how they would go about living, how to make a living. And of course the whalers had come in, and the traders. And most of your Pākehā names in Ngāti Pro, like they are down our way, come from whalers in the main, and traders. The colliers, all of those, those sorts of names. Their ancient sort of that side of their whakapapas go back to there. That's important because whaling was very, very lucrative. And the other thing with whaling, they used to have to take their oil to Auckland. And there were trading ships that went around here. This place operated through ships and canoes because there were no roads. And they traded, and they started to develop things like, many of the whānau started to develop things like pig farming and crop growing. And they'd sell those to the whalers, or they got even better at it, they started to carry those crops up to Auckland to sell up there, and that's how you ended up with the Kennedy Bay stopover place. That's where those ships used to stop over and shelter and then go up further on up to Auckland to trade. Then they got into wheat farming in a big, big way. And most of that was, while there was some mechanising of it, most of it was done by hand. So most of the wheat was, ground on mills and bagged it. And then the hapu started buying ships. And I think there were 5 or 6 ships or more from this coast that were owned by hapu, or 2 or 3 hapu. You see, their whole way of life had changed, from the older way. And they were trading. Anyhow, something happened with that sort of system, and it sort of gradually fell away. But one of the things which is important to this place that intervened, which was in 1865 and 67, the ho-ho came in. The Pai Māori people. And there were in actual fact 3 separate things there was the Kingitanga movement, the Pai Marire movement, and then the Te Kochi one, which then sort of encapsulated all of those other two, and it became known as the Hauhau. And that's when the whānau became involved with one another in terms of fighting one another. It really became very, very drastic. It was so sad. Probably if I read you this thing it would be much easier, but never mind. And that went on for about 2-3 years. What came out of that was some incredible leadership. And Piri Taumata Akura, and certainly the missionaries, people like Williams had moved into the area, and they started to live here. Eh? Whereas before it was really Piri Taumata and those other Māori people who had actually, they did all the hard work of converting, you know, the hapu and whānau up here to Christianity. And the missionaries just came in and took over. Anyhow, but this infighting of whānau was really horrific. And it took place throughout, it went right through the whole of Ngāti, especially up the Waiapu Valley here. When they managed their way through that, which was difficult because there were other challenges also happening. The other challenge was the Pākehās wanting to come in. What do you call it? Colonising, yeah. And on top of that, of course, along with that was the government. And that's where these people that lie up on the hill here, and others in other parts, Ropata Wahawa, or Rapata, is that the correct pronunciation?
Yep.
Rapata, eh? Mokena, Ture, the Hokamo, and there's heaps of, there were others. I can't remember them all. These were the ones who took up the leadership, but in particular was Rapata and Mokena and Ture. And they had to move in on their people because what they were concerned about was the government bringing troops in, which then would lead on to confiscation of land. And they were very aware of that, and they had some massive battles over here at Tiki Tiki all the way throughout. And just to cut the thing, you know, to get to the house, was that those whānau battles really nearly destroyed you as a people. And Rapata, of course, his way of fixing things was to shoot them all.
Fair enough.
But he had other leaders there like Mokena, and then he said, Taho, you know, he worked out another way of and what he was concerned about was maintaining te whanaungatanga o Ngāti Pro, te haputanga, and the iwi thing wasn't as important then as it is now. It was mainly those hapu that had to be retained and maintained. Those battles sort of finished around about 1867, 1868, and then they calmed down, and probably mid-1870s, this house went into construction. Now the interesting thing about that, and what I'm talking to you about now, is the reason for these whakairo being women and children. They represent the whānau, and of course they didn't have names. Who would be brave enough to do that? You wouldn't have enough whakairo in you to do it anyhow, eh? And it goes right through the whole house. You'll see little people crawling out, see? Between the legs, over the bodies.
Twins.
They're everywhere. They are incredible. So therefore, one of the criteria I missed this out. That pin they gave me was when you decorate a house, the importance of the artworks is number 1 is whakairo. Number 2 is tukutuku. Number 3 is painting, kōwhaiho. Just, you know, those things. Ngā mahi āringaringa. And when you go into it, he would say, well, the whakairo is important in the first place because it's tapu. They usually represent rangatira, or warriors, or chiefs, and you don't want to mess with any of that sort of stuff. That's why they're tapu. But hello, come in here and they're all women. So you see the shift. Now the tukutuku supports the whakairo. It still doesn't here, but where do you find the warriors and the chiefs? In here. On the tukutuku. Here they are. And of course with that sound sort of Christian ethic background that was built into them and all the writing, as soon as you put names on them like that, kare kahua tapu. Gone. So you fellas have a very sacred house, but a very safe house. Put it that way. So you see the switch. It hasn't lost its mana. It's changed it. And it's changed the order. And this is why I say you've got a very modern house. You've got a very important house. No other house in the country has that kind of kaupapa. And yet, the cunning old beggars made it still look traditional. Why is that fella up there painted white? Come on. He wasn't a Pākehā. He wasn't a kiritea. Come on. Why is he painted white after I've just told you what I've just told you? Pardon? Yeah, all right.
He was clean. After 8 wives. Pure. Must be to get 8 wives.
Come on, you guys.
Christianity.
Women.
Christianity.
It's not to die from birds. Neither is just because it's been cleaned up. Come on, how do you clean somebody in the Christian religion?
Baptizing. Baptism.
And
Purity.
and
Bliss. Water.
you've got most of it. The only thing you haven't got is they dressed them in white.
Huka papa.
Especially when you what do you call it? You know, when they've just born. Baptized. Dressed them in white. So will you people who are whakatoi that fella up there, will you take all those words back, please? Because he's my tūpuna too. But that's why. That's why. So your whakapapa, you will find, while it's here, demonstrated openly for everybody. That's what I'm talking about with the writing. Kare kau he tapu. Engari, koe nei te whakapapa, koe nei ngā akonga, a ngā tangata pera ia piripi mā, ne? Ana, tui e ngā ingo, mo te katoa. That fella did a lot of bad stuff, mate. That fella up there, you know, up on the top there, he did a lot of bad stuff. So they rebirthed him, really. Tongo here ngā. And you know, when I told Tom Te Maro this, he wouldn't believe it, eh? He just didn't want it. So you know what I said to him? Well, I suppose you wanted to be black, eh? Te paua hoki o tēnā tanga. Yeah. But yeah, that's why it's white. So that because he's the head of, you know, the teko on top, he's the one next to up there. all the whakapapa that you find in general, other than your tukutuku panels which are open to everybody, that's why these things are not named. But not only that, they didn't want any more fights in their whānau sector of the tribe. But here you see also the hapu names coming up, eh? But even some of those got themselves into deep trouble. But outside here, you will find the whakapapa continues on. Now, as Derek said, and I really enjoyed Derek's kōrero, that was great, because it just fits with what I'm trying to tell you, in not as musical sort of way, I suppose. This was done by Kihirini, who is Api's great-great-grandfather. Tika? Great-great? Was he a great-great-grandfather?
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, Kihirini would have been a contemporary of Raharuhi Rukupo. And in actual fact, he went and worked with him. And I would think that he worked with him on Te Hauki Tura. Because Te Hauki Turanga was opened in 1840. And Kihirini would have gone there. And why I raise that is that, yep, I think he rode these things around the whole way out here, didn't he? He rode them down the river. And then they brought them back up. Because originally that was supposed to go to Te Hapuku at Heretaunga somewhere.
Correct.
Is that correct? To build a house over there.
Yeah.
And then this ho-ho thing struck. And that's when Ropata, I think, bought these and brought them back. And he did that. He did, I would say he carved these, the Potahu, Hu, and the Potuarongo, as well as Ngā Potoko Manuate. That is a very different style of carving. The other carvings he did were the pane on top here. And the interesting one is you see Te Awera up there, which is Ngā Mahanga, eh? Te Awera was known for its twins.
No, te whanau rakairo.
Whānau Rakaio.
Yeah. Ta māpataki rao ko tika te waiwaha.
There you go. Yeah. And there's another, there's some other pairs down the back there on the tukutuku. On that side there and on that side. So, and of course there are many stories. And then you have, of course, who's this fellow on top here?
Tūterani whiu.
No, the one on the pane.
Oh, tū mona kōtori.
Tū moana kōtori. And that's him over there having fun with his ladies. on this kōpare. Is that right, Derek?
Rutanga and rongo mai tauarau.
Now where's Promata? Promata's in here somewhere or out there?
Don't know where Promata is.
Anyhow, why I'm bringing that up, if you look at the paintings, these four whaiwhai, what you have on here, of course Eric spoke about the Mango part of it. You have the Maui pattern there, the fish hook type thing. And then you have the, up here you have the Pātiki, which is actually not to do with the fish. It's to do with celestial. There's a thing in the Milky Way that's shaped like that. That's that diamond? Coal sack. The way that sits tells you, or used to tell our old people, the weather patterns. And that becomes important when you think of what Ropata and them did in farming and all of those kinds of things, because they applied it to farming. Yeah, have I got them all? Yeah, except one thing. This pattern infill up here, this one up here, he kamo, eyelashes. What's the saying with Promata?
Kamo kamo.
Kamo kamo. That's not the beach.
Knowing glances.
Knowing glances, which is the story that goes with. Yeah, and you know how big a story and the results of that were, eh? That's that pattern infill. So you can see there's so many unique features to this house. And when they redid it in 1937, they reopened it, 1937, they put these new windows in. It only had one lot of windows. I don't know whether it was, I think it would probably have been a slide, eh? Only had one lot of windows. In 1937 they put these new windows in, and that apparently had to go right around all the different iwi. To whānau Apanui, to the Tokotoru here, to, somewhere else, Rongo Whakata or something like that. I heard Tipene talking about that at one stage. And so as you can see, this house, that's why I say it has such a modern sort of sense to it, in the way that those Kroa went about putting it together. Shrewdly they did it so that people would accept it in a traditional way, but had altered all of the displays to suit the kaupapa they had. So what would you say is the kaupapa?
Peace and harmony.
Survival of a people.
That's putting it bluntly. And not only the survival of it was the regeneration of the whānau, regeneration of the hapu, which meant then the iwi was alive. And of course, those things that I outlined to you, which were the main challenges of changing environment around them, changing economic situation, changing way of life. It's amazing you people are still here.
We ain't going nowhere. Koine ko mātou kāinga tupu. No place like home. Not only here, right throughout Arohe.
But you can see the incredible leadership you had. This fella here, Ngata, was a product of that leadership. Because those old gentlemen, and no doubt the kuia themselves, knew they had to change. They had to keep changing. And they had to adjust. And of course, Ropata became the policeman of the school because they recognized education was going to be so important. And of course, there's the product. And they also knew that they would have to have some input into the governance of this country. There's the product. And of course, the ones that you have today. And others who, they were right onto it. It's amazing, eh? We just take it for granted. But no. Ropata, Mokena, Ture, all of those people. The other part, that was how adaptable those old Kroa were. And they didn't give up on that. They also took up farming in a big way. And of course he was the one, and no doubt it was initiated by Ropata and all of those. I don't know how they met. I don't know how they did all this stuff. You fellas must know. How did they do it? Did they gather together? They must have. And you need to get that story
with each other.
Yeah, you need to get that story out. You need to look at it and work it through, because it's an amazing, because it's your history, and here you see Apua Waipene. So this house, as you know what it's like, just us being here today, being with you all today is fantastic. Look what it does. What a beautiful place. It even allows Derek to stand up and talk. At the back of this house there's a head. Did you know that? Yes. That's your link with Kaunun. In other words, these fellows were so accommodating. When you go around and you look, after all the beat-ups from Ngāpui, from the whānau Apanui before, probably others, and then to Ngāpui, and then to the massive changes, and then the bloody government still wanted to taha your fellas' land. Yeah. for years. All of this land up here. They wanted to take it. Mainly because they sent troops in with and some rifles over to help settle, you know, the squabbles. And yet many of the Pākehā colonisers said if it wasn't for Ngāti Pro's resourcefulness and the protection of them, the Pākehās would have been wiped out up here, all around Gisborne. And the own people did a huge amount for tūranga. And so they should, because Rongo Whakaata is part of you and part of us. He was a contemporary of Hingangaro. Yeah. Hingangaro School Te Rāwhioro. There was also a school at Tūranga known as where Raharuhi Rukupo was learned his carving and that and others was Kaipoho. Tēnā te kuru. And now that's another yarn, but I won't go there because there is another one which Derek touched on, which I started to sort of look at in terms of the whakairua and all of this work here. This is, I suppose you might say, the best examples you can get of Ngāti Pro Iwi style. It is tops. If you look at these carvings, I'll tell you why here. If you look at these, Derek talked of the manaya. You know the manaya figure 8. The manaya in Hokkaido is the figure that it's the agent that transforms the spirit through te arai into the spirit world. That's in the Māori world. And on carvings, like if you go down to Tūranga, you'll see them other carvings, you'll find there are a lot of figures that fit in around here. These are not manaya. That's another kōrero again. And you see how these are left bare? There's nothing around. Done on purpose. Because these growers, as well as the missionaries of course, did not want to have a competition with the way in which Māori saw their spirits being transported to the other world. No manaya. Interesting, eh? You look around the whole house. I'll show you where there are a couple, but I'm not sure whether they were there originally or came in 1937. There are none here, mainly because of that it conflicted with the Christian ethic. There are no manaya, and there are only 2 Pākati patterns basically. Pākati is this stuff here. There it is there, that one, which is a very old rodent pattern. And this one here. That in general is called raupong. You know, it comes from a fern. And that's a very protective plant. It was also used when they cut down a tree, they would put fern leaves over the top of the stump to stop, you know, bad things going into it. So the raupong pattern is on here. Sometimes I wonder, it's also called niho kuri or niho taniwha. I just wonder about those 4 brothers, hey? Ngā kuri. Kuri pāka.
Te atau kuku korohau e longa tangata ki.
It could be ngā niho kuri, eh? But you notice that's only those 2 patterns in here and outside. But when you see all of this simplicity and this approach, very direct and very clear, it's quite an amazing place. There are other things, but I think you've had enough. Thank you.